Hi, I'm Martha Monroe. I'm at the University of Florida in the School of Forest Resources and Conservation. I started about 20 years ago and now have a three-way split between extension, teaching, and research. My area is environmental education, which is a handy way to connect to extension because my area of expertise is program development and evaluation. So there's a very comfortable extension of my work into extension.
Cool. When you became a new extension specialist, what are some pieces of advice that people gave you about just the balance of everything, or what are some things you stumbled upon yourself without getting that advice?
In terms of advice, my director told me in my first year of working at the University of Florida that the most important thing I could do was to go to the extension conference that we have every year that brings all the extension agents and specialists together. And part of what he meant was you need to interact with agents. You need to find out what they do, what they need. You need to develop friendships and associations. They need to know you, and that's the secret to extension success. So that also means a needs assessment, being out there, making sure they know what area I can help them with. So they shouldn't call me to identify trees. They should call me to think about 4-H programs or something like that. So I did. I started with the needs assessment. I had a whole laundry list of things I thought they might want and asked them how important they would be or how interested they would be in those kinds of activities. And that directed the first 5 years of my work. I needed to work on the 4-H project books. I needed to work on citizen science activities, update the contests that we have, and that kept me busy for a good long time. The other thing that I think was really useful that I stumbled into was because I had a split appointment, I started off with extension and teaching. And so what I tried to do was blend those two things together. Now that I'm doing extension, teaching, and research, I'm trying to blend them all in various combinations. So that means if I have an extension program, I think about using a master's student to develop a needs assessment, which can be a thesis and a research paper, if I do it right. When it's teaching, I had a bunch of undergrads research ways we use trees in various and interesting products, and then we all made an extension fact sheet out of it. There's other ways that I've also tried to blend things together. When I was working on curriculum development, I had a bunch of students develop activities, and then the next year they evaluated activities. They've evaluated websites. They've helped develop websites because younger people have a way more facile ability with website software than I ever will. When it comes to website designs, I was really to put our curriculum on the website and make it available. I had no idea that people could develop web tools to do as many things as we ended up doing. So it wasn't just an online training where it was what I would have done in person made available on the web. It was a whole new world of videos and options and pull-down menus and crazy things that I never would have thought about. But you hire younger people and away they go.
How would you, what would you recommend a new extension specialist to do in terms of balancing their job description and then interacting with their supervisors and then interacting, because they might have an extension supervisor, they might have the college dean, they might have kind of multiple hats. So how would you recommend that, or what would you tell them to think about as they move forward so that they can still get tenure but that they can kind of meet these different bosses' needs essentially?
I'm also on the mentoring committee for all of our assistant professors, helping them go through the process to get tenure. And one thing that we all recommend that they do is think strategically about their 5-year plan. When they come in, it probably takes a year to get your feet on the ground and figure out what you're going to be doing. So do needs assessments and try to figure out your strategy in the beginning. But then once you have a framework of where you're headed, plot it out into a strategy so that so that by the time you go up for tenure, you have graduated a graduate student, at least. It could be maybe 2 master's students. You've got a PhD student well underway, at least through prelims. You've got some publications that have come out around your extension activity, and your extension activity is interwoven with research if you have that if they have that appointment, or teaching. So think about the big picture of where you're going and where you want to, by what time you need to be where. You can also use presentations at conferences to keep the momentum moving forward. So something like ANREP happens every other year. Think about what you can present every other year. Think about what awards you can be nominated for at various points along the time, so that in 5 years, you've got a package that looks like you should get tenure. Another thing is to listen and ask questions of anybody that can give you advice. Those being extension agents, and also colleagues and peers, and also supervisors. So if somebody says, make sure you go to the regional extension meetings and tell people what you're doing and ask people what they want, then make sure you go do that at least once or twice. And then remember what you've learned, document it, and use that to justify, well, I chose to do this because I heard it at the regional meeting. People told me to do this, so this is why I did it. So that sort of justification just makes sense in the end. Some of the best advice I had was to think about extension program development in a way that carries the program to other people who will deliver the program. So by and large, that means extension agents. But it doesn't have to be extension agents. In some areas, at least in forestry and other kinds of natural resource areas, there aren't always extension agents across a state who are willing to take that program and run with it. So we've found other kinds of intermediate delivery people who share our programs. In some areas, it's the education person hired by the county fire department, and they deliver information on fire and risk and wildfire risk reduction. Sometimes it's landscape architects who deliver information around, well, you live in a fire-prone ecosystem, so let's not use these plants in your yard. Sometimes it's teachers, and they then deliver information about forest ecosystems or how we manage forests or something like that. So think about that. Think about developing a program that isn't just yours. You develop the resources, you develop the materials, and somebody else actually delivers it to another audience. And if you can think about that sort of Amway scheme of that triangle of delivery of materials, then you have a greater spread and you have more people involved in your program. And then think about how you're going to collect the data about what other people are doing. So those intermediate folks need forms, they need similar kinds of evaluation materials, they need the report materials so that they're all collecting the same data and sending it to you. So then you synthesize it all and say, look how many things happened with my program. It may be that you want to know how many people had interviews with the media and what sort of spread does that media reach? How many people read that newspaper? And you can compile all of that and make an impressive activity. So for example, back in 1998, Florida had a lot of wildfires. People all over the state needed to know about how to reduce the risk of wildfire. Extension agents didn't know. Extension agents needed to learn too. But lots of extension agents weren't interested in learning enough to answer all the questions. So we developed this system where extension agents were paired with the county forestry folks who understood fire and trees and risk reduction, but weren't necessarily connected to the churches and the Kiwanis clubs and the neighborhoods that needed to know that information. So we developed this whole toolkit of resources, brochures and fact sheets and videos and all sorts of tools that people could use to do workshops, to talk to the media, to get the word out. We even made big signs so that people could put them up in areas that had been, where prescribed fire had been used to reduce the reduction of risk of wildfire. Sorry, I said that backwards. We even made these large signs that could be put up to designate areas of prescribed fire, which had been used to reduce the risk of wildfire risk. We even made these large signs that said, prescribed fire, reduce the risk of wildfire, so that people could designate areas where fire had been used. When we rolled it out, we invited the extension agents, I think 14, representing 67 different counties, signed up. And then we said, oh, that's not enough. This needs to be a whole state program. And people said, well, you should have let people know through the regional programs. And I said, I did. And because they already did, and they still weren't interested, my boss went to the dean. And the dean sent out a message to every county saying, this is important, you should send somebody. And then we had 42 extension agents show up. But I also, at the same time, had county foresters from across the county, and they met each other at our workshops, and they worked together at the same table to look at maps and say, these are areas of high risk. How can we work together to deliver programs to these neighborhoods? Or, these are the stations I'm going to be talking to about for television interviews. Do you want to go work with the newspapers? And so they teamed up and they did stuff. We made a 4-color brochure that was just beautiful. And I had one extension agent say, would you mind if I took all the information from your lovely 4-color brochure and put it on a mimeograph black and white handout so that it can go as an insert in our church bulletin? Because that's where people go to read information, and that's what they'll trust. So the extension agents know how to deliver information to people in a way that makes sense. And I said, great, go for it, do that. Perfect. If you don't want a 4-color brochure, you can use whatever works. The idea is to get the word out. And we had also developed the resources that they would report back to me on what they did and how many people they reached and who came to their workshops so that we can send them all evaluations 6 months later. What do you remember? What did you do? How have you changed your landscape? And it was a great project.